Hi, everyone. My name is Robin Fenley. I would like to welcome everyone to today's event. We're just waiting a couple of minutes for the ambassador from Chile to be able to get the audio going, and then we will begin the program.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Frances Zeinedin, the Vice Chair of the NGO Committee on Aging. Cynthia Stewin, our chair, is currently in Rome, Italy, and sends greetings to all of us. She's attending on behalf of our committee the Ministerial Conference for the 4th Review and Appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, MIPA, for Europe and North America region. MIPA is now 20 years old, and we find upon review of the national reports that there is still much to be done to protect the rights of older persons. Other regional meetings will be taking place before the Commission for Social Development meets in February 2023 to consider the findings of the 4th Review and Appraisal of MIPA. Information about these regional meetings will be put on our website as soon as more information becomes available. Because of the Ministerial Conference in Rome, one of our members headed the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, headed by Susan Summers, who usually organizes WEAAD, as we call it, in New York. She will be organizing the event in Rome this year. And the Committee on Aging is pleased to organize this WEAAD event for those of us who are not lucky enough to be in Rome. And we have a great lineup of speakers. I want to draw your attention to 2 publications of the World Health Organization that were launched this morning in Rome: Tackling Abuse of Older Persons, 5 Priorities for the United Nations Decade of Healthy Aging, and a digital communications package that WHO has prepared. Both of these documents will be on our website, so please share it with your networks. We will also share with you a copy of a letter that we just received that was sent to the US Ambassador of the United Nations, from the National Council on Aging, Leading Age, American Society on Aging, National Association of Nutrition and Aging Services Programs, Help Age International, and grant makers in aging. All of them signed a letter calling for the support of the US government for a United Nations legal instrument to protect the rights of older persons. Before we start today's event, I wish to highlight just a few updates on what we've been doing in terms of advocacy work at the United Nations. The Open-Ended Working Group held its 12th session this past April, and an agreement was reached on the proposal of Argentina for the establishment of a cross-sectional core group to meet before its 13th session next year to prepare and present a draft text that would determine the main gaps in the international human rights system for older persons. As you are all aware, the Open-Ended Working Group has been focusing on specific topics concerning aging issues these past 12 years and has yet to discuss the feasibility of an international legal instrument to protect the rights of older persons. It is expected that the core group will push this process forward. Our subcommittee to promote a convention for the rights of older persons will be following this closely and will report back to you as soon as we have information about the core group's progress of work. We will also be sharing information with you about the upcoming multi-stakeholder meeting that will take place in Geneva to discuss the report of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on normative standards and obligations under international law in relation to the promotion and protection of the rights of older persons. Please continue your work to advocate for an international legal instrument to protect the rights of older persons, and check our website regularly for updated information. The NGO Committee on Aging is also a member of the Stakeholder Group on Aging, which was established in 2013 in collaboration with other members of civil society that make up the major groups and other stakeholders. Every year, we participate in the preparation of the position paper that is submitted to the high-level political forum, which will be meeting from 5 to 15 July. Our focus is on SDG 4, education and lifelong learning, and SDG 5, gender equality. This will also appear on our website. The Stakeholder Group on Aging will also be organizing in collaboration with the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, the Program on Aging section, a side event during the high-level political forum. And as soon as we are allotted a date and a time, we will send out the flyer for your participation. The topic this year will be Older Women in Crises, Invisible Among the Most Vulnerable. As you will have noticed on the flyer for today's event, the celebration of the International Day of Older Persons will take place on Monday, 3 October. The topic is the resilience and contributions of older women. So be on the lookout in the coming weeks ahead for more information about this key event on our annual calendar. Last but not least, you will have received our latest newsletter, which covers issues such as elder abuse and neglect, learning, a lifelong process, a protected right, and what we learn and what we teach throughout the age continuum. We would really like your feedback and suggestions for our newsletter. Okay, now we can begin our program. I have the greatest pleasure to introduce to you Ambassador Renee Ruiz-Diaz, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Chile to the United Nations. Chile currently holds the chairmanship of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. Ambassador Ruiz-Diaz is a strong advocate for the rights of older persons, and with his colleague, Ms. Maria Paula Perdomo, are active movers and shakers to push towards a convention for the rights of older persons. Ambassador Ruiz-Diaz is one of the rare ambassadors who actually welcome civil society partnerships, and we value his attention, his collaboration, and his friendship. Ambassador Ruiz-Diaz, we are honored to have you open our event today and to say a few words on the observance of this World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Frances. These are very kind words. Good afternoon, colleagues and friends. Allow me to express you our gratitude for inviting Chile to the NGO Committee, which does such an amazing work here in New York, for inviting us to commemorate this much needed World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. A few remarks. We must be all concerned about the fact that in many parts of the world, elder abuse occurs with little recognition or response. Until recently, this serious social problem has not been given the required visibility and is dealt as a private matter, and therefore it remains vastly underreported. Older persons have the right to a life free of violence and discrimination, and we need to ensure that the same rights and fundamental freedoms that apply to individuals on early stages of life are upheld at later stages as they age as well. Older persons are right holders, and Chile firmly believes that they must be empowered and their voices should be amplified in all spheres of society when it comes to what they want, they need, and their contributions to the communities where they are really agents of change. For these contributions to happen, a fundamental premise is that the rights are protected, promoted, and respected. And for that, we have been supporting of the idea that normative protections for older persons can serve as much as a shield against violence and abuse, and to protect dignity, economic independence, and their autonomy. Chile strongly supports the drafting of an international legally binding instrument for the rights of older persons, as well as the work of the open-ended working group on aging, which we expect will deliver a substantive outcome containing recommendations on how to address the normative protection gaps been detected. Today, it's an opportunity for calling to action individuals, organizations, and community to raise awareness about abuse of older people, neglect, and exploitation. Today and every day, we must be not only allies, but stand up against elder abuse, and also to seek good practices and mobilize new partners, new energies to carry out a more effective prevention of this scourge, and to have stronger laws and policies to address all aspects of elder abuse, including the biases, stereotypes, and the preconditions that allow elder abuse to happen. Dear colleagues and friends, you can count on my country in Chile to join in your efforts in raising awareness against elder abuse and keep on seeking practical solutions to effectively respond to this very dramatic issue. Thank you very much, and it's very inspiring to see the energy you put into this work, Frances, and all the people on the NGO Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Diaz, for your words and for your participation. We know that you might have to leave early because you are very busy, and please feel free to obviously leave whenever you feel it's necessary. Now, I would like to turn the floor over to Dr. Robin Fenley, a member of our executive committee, to moderate the session. Robin has worked with older persons in various capacities for over 30 years, retiring as Assistant Commissioner from the New York City Department for the Aging in 2019. Prior to her government tenure, Robin worked in nursing homes and inpatient psychiatric settings and managed a community-based elder abuse prevention program. She has developed and expanded programs throughout her career and presented extensively on caregiving, dementia in long-term care, and elder abuse. Robin is the chair of our Older Women Subcommittee and a member of the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, INPIA, and the International Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics. In addition, she is chairing the 2022 United Nations International Day of Older Persons, to be held in person at the United Nations on October the 3rd. Robin is a fairly new member to the Executive Committee, and as you can see, we've put her to work. She's involved in just about everything. As a licensed clinical social worker, Robin teaches social policy and practice at Fordham University Graduate School of Social Service and at the Hunter College Silberman School of Social Work, and is contributing to edited book chapters on social policy and aging. And now I shall keep quiet and hand the proceedings over to Robin. Thank you, Robin. Take it away.
It's great, Frances. Thank you. I'm thrilled actually to have this be working with everybody here at the Committee on Aging as my next step in terms of career and what to do next with the rest of my life, frankly. So just a couple of things. Thank you all for coming. I think today is going to be a really exciting and engaging discussion on elder abuse. Ambassador, I'm just thrilled to hear your words talking about how committed you are for Chile to be part of this work on countering elder abuse. So thank you for all of that. And I suspect we're going to be knocking on your door. So thank you. But I would again just remind people, I know that Anna has been putting it up, I've seen the chat here and there. Please put your questions that you might have in the chat. We'll do our best to get to them when we are completed. But first, I just really wanted to give sort of a brief overview about World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, WEAAD. And hats off first to INPEA, because they were the entity that first recognized and understood the importance and urgency of raising global awareness about the prevalence of elder abuse. And so they held the first commemoration in June 15th in 2006. And through relentless advocacy and requests in relative short time for the UN General Assembly agreed and acknowledged, recognized the importance of establishing a day, WEAAD, as an official event. So since that time, that was in 2011. So from 2006 to 2011, there was acknowledgement, which is really huge. And so since then, it's become an annual event, with June 15th being the designated day when everybody around the world gathers really to voice its concern about the prevalence of elder abuse and to support the efforts for developing international legal instruments to protect the rights of older persons. This year, the Committee on Aging would like to broaden this awareness to include those persons who are older, who have been living with a disability, and have also experienced some form of neglect, abuse, and violence. Elder abuse is characterized by its hiding from public view, largely occurring in private. And older persons, those with cognitive impairment, those with a disability, can also be hidden from public view and essentially marginalized as a population and thereby primed for potential exploitation. So what is elder abuse? Essentially, it's a single or repeated act or lack of appropriate action that occurs in any relationship of trust and causes harm or distress to an older person. With 5 basic types of maltreatment: physical. Oftentimes people usually think of physical as, elder abuse, but there's other kinds. Psychological, the threatenings, the verbal threats, etc. Financial, sexual abuse, and neglect, any or all of which can be experienced by an individual. You can see how comprehensively harmful abuse can be to an individual. Elder abuse occurs in developing and developed countries, and yet, as the ambassador stated, it's typically underreported. According to current estimates by the World Health Organization, approximately 1 in 6 people over the age of 60, or nearly 141 million people, suffer from some form of abuse. This number is likely higher, and certainly with the global aging, is going to increase. So neglect, abuse, and violence toward older people is among the most hidden and underrepresented violations of human rights. We will, I'm sure, be hearing about the role that COVID has played, pandemic has played in increasing instances of abuse. But I think it's now time to get to these esteemed panelists that we have to hear about the very important work that they have been doing in this area. And I would like to first acknowledge Ruth's contribution, Dr. Warwick's contribution in educating us about how to be more inclusive in the work that we do by telling us about CART, which is a system designed to include persons who are hard of hearing in activities that are being done, workshops, for instance. And so Dr. Warwick is president of the International Federation of Hard of Hearing People and is first vice president of the International Disability Alliance. Born hard of hearing, Ruth became active in the disability movement in her early 20s and is a founding member of the National Hard of Hearing Association in Canada. She was formerly a senior accessibility advisor at the University of British Columbia and currently is director of programs and services for Wavefront Center for Communication Accessibility. Previously, she founded the award-winning Seniors Education Center at the University of Regina and is a former chairperson of the Council of Aging in Regina, Canada. She has a doctoral degree from the University of British Columbia and was recognized for her work by being named a recipient of the university's President Award of Excellence in Diversity. And she presently lives in the lovely Vancouver, Canada. Dr. Warwick, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Robin. It is my pleasure and sorry, my machine has a way of acting on its own and has a mind of its own. So I'd like to start off by explaining a little bit about what captioning is, because Robin has asked me to do that. CART is a form of providing the verbal content in captions, and it is provided here as part of this session. I myself, being hard of hearing, do rely on captions, and I'll be reading the captions for the questions. Sometimes it takes a few minutes for the captions to actually catch up with verbal content. So that's always something to keep in mind. In our world today, we expect people to respond very quickly, but sometimes the technology isn't quite keeping up with us. I do have a slide presentation. So basically what I will do is go through that presentation in the time available, and I'm going to start with sharing my screen. Okay, are you able to see the slides on the screen? Wonderful. So first of all, I'd like to start by explaining that I'm speaking in my role as the Vice Chair of the International Disability Alliance. The International Disability Alliance was formed as a result of the establishment of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and actually even predated the establishment of the CRPD, because the members of the group were part of the advocates that led to the establishment of the CRPD. And it was, first of all, an informal network, and then it became a more formal organization. I mentioned this because I note your interest in establishing something similar for older adults. Currently, we have 8 international organizations of persons with disabilities. The one that I belong to is the International Federation of Hard of Hearing Persons. And then we have 6 regional networks throughout the world, and we connect together 1,100 organizations of persons with disabilities. And the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is at the cornerstone of our work. The CRPD represents a paradigm shift in terms of how we look at disability. It uses a social model of disability, whereby disability, to quote from the convention, is an evolving concept, and disability results from the interaction between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental barriers that hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So from this definition, you can see that the emphasis is on the social constructs in society that create barriers and limitations, not on the individual's own whatever condition they may have. That condition can be ameliorated with supports, accommodation, and often it's the attitudes and the barriers in the community that prevent full realization of a person's ability to participate. The definition of disability does include older persons with disabilities, 2 categories: those who were born or grew up having a disability, such as myself, and are now moving into the age of being older adults. And then there are those people who acquire disability later in life, which is often for the aging population, the majority of the persons. One of the things I can look forward to actually is that I will have many more people to communicate with who also have hearing loss, and we'll share the same kind of challenges and dynamics. The barriers that are faced by persons with disabilities is recognized as being greater because it's not just the barrier of the disability itself, but also 2 other stigmas: ageism, the barrier of discrimination on the basis of age, which operates to prevent older people with disabilities from accessing their rights, and in a sense is a put down to person. It's interesting. I have to tell this story. A few years ago, I had conversations on the phone with someone, and when we met in person, that individual said, "Oh, I am surprised that you are as young as you are. I thought you were old and decrepit." And that's, yeah, absolutely. That absolutely occurred. And that just shows what ageism is all about. And then we have the double whammy for women, which is the barrier of discrimination on the basis of gender that impacts on women and girls. And we've made lots of advances in different countries with women's rights, but we still face barriers of discrimination. And particularly in many developing countries, cultural norms are such that there are even more barriers faced by women. Lack of right to education, lack of right to public participation, even in some countries, lack of ability to be able to go out on their own without being accompanied by a man. So in this presentation, I wanted to highlight what the CRPD has to say about age. And I found it very interesting that there are actually 5 articles that specifically make some reference, or if not about age, at least about gender. And in the preamble, the CRP does recognize that persons with disabilities may be subject to multiple forms of discrimination on the basis of age. So it does, in the CRPD, fortunately recognize that discrimination is intersectional and has multiple impacts. Article 6, which is the section concerning women with disabilities, recognizes that women are subject to additional disabilities on the basis of gender. And it says that it requires state parties to take measures to ensure the full and equal participation and enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms of women. Article 6, or rather Article 8, on awareness raising, references both age and gender. In dealing with awareness raising, it calls on state parties to combat stereotypes, prejudices, and harmful practices related to persons with disabilities, including those based on sex and age in all areas of life. Now, the next article is much more specific in addressing issues related to abuse, which is the focus of the workshop today. There is a complete article on the freedom from exploitation, violence, and abuse. And it calls on states to take all appropriate legislative, administrative, social, educational, and other measures to protect persons with disabilities, both within and outside the home, from all forms of exploitation, violence, and abuse, including their gender-based aspects. It called upon supports and assistance for persons with disabilities, and education to prevent violence and abuse, and for independent monitoring. And I thought that was very interesting that they actually call for independent monitoring within states. Now, there are 2 other relevant articles. This Article 12 is equal recognition before the law. And it states a lack of such recognition affects older people if perceived to have a disability. And equal recognition before the law can impact on the independence of a person. And particularly when individuals are considered to have dementia based on their age, it contributes to violations of many older persons with disabilities rights. In other words, persons are assumed to have additional health conditions, even if they don't. Or if they have such health condition, violations of their rights are far in excess of what should be required for their ability to function. And it impacts on their legal capacity. So this is a really important article in discussing equal recognition and the rights of persons. And it also impacts on potential abuse of the rights of persons who are older or who have a disability. And this also goes into impacting on independent living. So Article 19 of the Convention requires that states recognize the right of all persons with disabilities to live in the community with choices equal to others, and to take effective and appropriate measures to facilitate full enjoyment by persons with disabilities of this right and their full inclusion and participation in the community. So in this particular article, it can refer to the right to people, regardless of the level that they need for services and supports, to be able to live independently and not to have that right taken away, not to be assumed that because they're older or they have some declines, that as a result of that, they should then be put into an institution or into a care home. This right to independent living supersedes all of that in the convention. So in conclusion, ageism in attitudes and policies results in unmet needs for services and supports being viewed as acceptable because of older age. So what this means is that both the individual can internalize the ageism, and also society operates on the basis of ageism. So as a result, many older people with disabilities live without services, relying on informal networks that can leave them vulnerable to abuse and undue influence. They are still the same person. Their needs and interests have not changed, but society's view of them may have. So the CRPD should be used as a tool to fight against ageism and sexism combined with disability, the triple whammy. The sections of the CRPD, Articles 6, 8, 12, 16, and 19 in particular, can be used to reinforce the human rights of elder persons, and in particular women, to combat elder abuse. And as a disability community and as a society as a whole, we need to think intersectionally when we think about elder abuse. We need to use the legal tools that we have available, including the CRPD, in our advocacy, and work together and develop the new tools that can further advance our cause. So I would like to thank you for this opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to the discussion and hearing the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Ruth. You have given so much to think about here. And I think when you're talking about the intersectionality of ageism and sort of that triple jeopardy of ageism, sexism, and disability, I don't know how you call the fourth when abuse gets put on top of this. This is the vulnerability of it is just so stark. And certainly when you are talking about using the legal tools, that is exactly what we're discussing around human rights protections for older adults, is getting some legal teeth behind this. So thank you very much. So don't go away. Continue this conversation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marie Beaulieu, who has a very long resume. And I suspect that this introduction, Marie, is just but a smidge of what all you have done. Marie is member of the Royal Society of Canada and full professor of the School of Social Work at the University of Sherbrooke, and researcher at the Research Center on Aging of the CIUSSS. And this is the network of the Eastern Townships region, right? And since November of 2010, Dr. Beaulieu has been the chairholder of the research chair on mistreatment of older adults funded by the Quebec government. Since 2017, she's been the co-director of the center that collaborates with the World Health Organization to promote senior-friendly environments fighting against mistreatment. For over 30 years, her research has primarily focused on the mistreatment of older adults and has been widely disseminated in multiple languages. So that speaks not only to the importance of it, but of the work that you are doing, but the necessity to have everybody around the world understand what about your work, what it is you're conveying here. And you've presented, I know, at many national, international forums, et cetera. In 2008, the government of Quebec hired you to serve as the scientific expert in the drafting of its government action plan to counter elder abuse, launched in 2010. She also contributed to the second version of the government's action plan made public in 2017. I would just like to do a side note here. I have been on NPEA phone calls, committee phone calls with Marie, and to listen to what she and others in Canada have been able to do to get the government of Canada to recognize and respond to elder abuse has been nothing short of miraculous. I mean, you are the role model for the world, honestly. So you are representative in NPEA, and you participate in all kinds of work around the rights of older persons. I think the one thing, I have a whole other page. You've been the fellow of NPEA, but in 2012 you received, please pronounce this, the award in the senior innovation category, Mary Estrien.
Yes, that's a regional recognition of my social involvement in the community.
It's actually a Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal. Just thought I would put that in there. I think I will stop with this because, you know, what you have to say will tell us more about you. So, Dr. Beaulieu, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. I think I'm really turning red. My blouse is orange, but my face is red now. I'm very, very happy to be here with you. And Ambassador Rui Diaz, thank you so much for being involved in this field. And thank you to the NGO Committee on Aging for putting together this session. It's a very exciting week because Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories, and the actions to counter elder abuse are actually more developed per province regarding the response, while prevention is kind of across Canada. Therefore, on Sunday, our minister responsible for seniors launched the 3rd plan of action to counter mistreatment of older adults. This explains why I'm not in Rome this week. I'm in Quebec because we have a series of activity around this plan of action. This plan of action contains more than 53 direct actions where ministries or government agencies are accountable, and each year they have to produce a report. The money invested in this plan of action for 5 years is 50 million Canadian dollars, 50 million. So it means that the government here is really thinking that this is a priority and that we would need to continue to move forward. So I'm very excited about that. And it's part of that first plan of action. So this is the 3rd. The first one was launched in 2010 that I was given the responsibility and the honor to have a research chair on mistreatment of older adults. So I have been involved in the field for 35 years, but I must say that having a chair really helped move forward and do more research. And I'm in that type of a position where I really think that the role of the researcher in the public space is to be in dialogue with practitioners, with seniors association and groups, so older persons groups, and also with the government to influence social policies and also the practice. So today I would like to talk briefly about one of the research that I just completed in the past year. It was actually money coming from the 2nd plan of action. And it's a research on mistreatment of older adults. And actually, even if the title is older adults, it's mainly on older women. Are you surprised? I'm not. So we had a series of respondents that were older women. So this research was funded by one government agency that helps increase the social participation of people with disabilities in Quebec, Canada. So let's start by the review of literature, which was kind of very interesting because we will see very often in the different articles that physical, cognitive, or mental health disabilities are high risk factors of being mistreated. Once that is said, we don't see much. So I was trying to find some experience of older person with disabilities. What did they go through when they experienced mistreatment, and also what type of services did they receive? And actually, I didn't find much. And one of my shocks was to find out that only 2 studies in the world had given the voices to older person with disabilities. So all the other times it was more quantitative research or research done in through the files, but not with direct interviews, which was a real richness to do so. So the other thing that I found that was a real surprise when they were talking about mistreatment or abuse of people with disabilities, there was kind of 2 scenarios. The first one was that those persons were living in institutions, so it was the staff that were the mistreaters. Or the second scenario was people are living at home, but they are in a caregiving relationship and it's the caregivers who are abusing them. And you will see in a few minutes that actually we found a lot of other scenarios that are much more complicated than that. So for us, this study was a good timing to look at ageism, but also like Ruth said, and I really appreciate it, to have that intersectionality approach with sexism, ableism, and we were also hoping to introduce racism into the study, but our sample was not rich enough on that side. So we were at least able to look at 3 of the isms: ageism, sexism, and ableism. It was also the time to look at systemic approaches. So the individual point of view, the personal network point of view, the services, and the policy. So what we did was a series of interviews, and I have to be very honest, it was very difficult to recruit. Like, not many people are ready to talk about what happened to them. But what we were looking for is people that experience mistreatment in the past 5 years, that had at least one disability, and that were capable or able to be in an interview with us, which was already a challenge, because when you look at the literature, you realize that a lot of people with cognitive impairment are at high risk of mistreatment, but it's very difficult to conduct an interview in that context. But we had one, at least, that came. So we did find 11 persons who gave us their stories. And the first thing that we saw is from 11 persons, we had 18 different stories, because several persons in our sample actually experienced 2 or 3 types of abuse in the past 5 years. So different situations. The other thing that really struck us, like I said, it was mainly women, 8 women, 3 men. So I'm going to talk more about women today because there's a major impact to look at what is happening to them. But what really struck us is that the persons were actually living, for the majority of them, at home and experiencing abuse through services. So people coming from public services, from private services, or from community services. So here we're breaking the myth about the caregiver that is the abuser. Actually, we had a few, but it was not the majority. In the majority of the cases, people were abused, women were abused by the service providers that were paid to come and give them services. As you can imagine, this has a very major impact, because it means that as a consequence, people don't want to talk about it because they don't want to lose the services, because they know they need the services. They want to continue living at home. But on the other hand, they really want the situation to stop. So when we started to look at the consequences, we found the same consequences that we found in the general literature on elder abuse. So physical consequences, mental or health consequences, also financial and material consequences, and also social consequences like losing networks and everything. But the worst was actually, like I said, the fear of losing services, and also the fact that a lot of these people really thought that abuse were their fault. And that you see that usually in the literature. But here, some people really felt that they were losing the quality of their life. And one woman I will never forget, she had been a researcher for a while, and now she was an older woman with disabilities. And she said to us, and I'm going to read the quotes, "This is why your research is so important. How important your research can be. You know, I only hope that it will help to be out of what we call folder 13, that means the waste box. And I don't want your report to be forgotten in the minister's drawer like it happens too often. There's a need for changing in this field, and government after government, we feel that we always have to restart to actually talk to them and try to see what can be done." So this woman actually found it so difficult that she explained to us a concept that I never heard before, and what she called applying self-euthanasia. So for her, it was not suicide, it was self-euthanasia. And saying that if you choose to finish, but because euthanasia is usually presented as ending your suffering, and usually it's done by others in certain countries, not all around the world. But for her, that was the main solution. So another result that she experienced, and that was very important in this research, is we tend to talk about help seeking as being going to services. But actually, for 10 of the 11 participants, the first help seeking was towards family and friends. So in this study, families and friends were very instrumental, first of all, to recognize the situation, to give first support, but also many of them stayed all through the services that the person asked to get out of the situation. And I can say that the consequences for them sometimes were almost as terrible that the consequences of the abuse were on the person living with disability. So that really got us to think a lot and actually to push forward on the government, because we have to have a stronger response and to be certain that people are not banging on a certain numbers of doors before receiving services, because there was a real call for services. And like I said, there was a lot of self-blaming, and this probably was the first time it was happening in a research like that people were telling me how much they blame themselves. And I'm thinking again of this particular woman who actually, some interviews, even though all interviews are very good, some are kind of maybe richer than others or moving you more. And this woman really moved me. We spent 2.5 hours with her. She was suffering during the interview, but she really wanted us to continue till the end and tell us her 3 stories. And she was telling me how guilty she felt because she was a professional. And because she was a professional, this shouldn't have happened to her because she should have known better. And that led me at the end of the interview to actually get out of my role of a researcher and to start a conversation with her and telling her that the research results in the past years are really showing that the best predictors for abuse, or actually the best things to look at to understand situation of abuse, are not the characteristic of the victim. It's really the characteristic of the abuser. And we have to change the focus, and always talking about vulnerability of older person, but really to look at the dynamics between persons and really put more focus on the abuse. like I said, I've been in the field for 35 years. It's probably one of the research that moved me the most. And we decided that these interviews were so important that we always went 2 by 2 to do the interviews to be certain that we were capable of listening and supporting the persons. And 2 weeks after each interview, we called back the person to see how they felt. And we really wanted to be certain that we didn't reopen too much a trauma. And when I say too much, you must probably be surprised. It's because we all know that when we get someone to talk about their story, we're reopening something. But we also have a social responsibility to be there as supporters and to be certain that the people get the services. So we had some links with different agencies that were ready to jump in the situation, provide some psychosocial accompaniment if needed. So this report, because I think I saw a question in the chat, is actually published in French, and we just finished the translation in English. It should be online anytime. I thought it would be last week, but we were not able to finish it because too many activities. But it will be online very soon. And I could put in the chat the address of my web site at the research chair. It's a fully bilingual website, so you will find information in French, because as you can hear, I'm a French Canadian, but the information is also available in English. Thank you.
Ruth, Maria, I just want to hear more. This was really, really good. Thank you so much for sharing these stories, because I think it is when you hear the personal, experiences, this is what really brings it home for all of us. Call us back in 2 weeks after we have time to digest this to see how we are doing with this. This is very powerful between what you have said and what Ruth has given to us. I want to just turn it now over to our expert moderator who is going to conduct the Q&A, Erica Dar, who is AARP's Director of Global Alliances and International Affairs and head of just about everything else that needs doing. It's Erica. So Erica, I turn it over to you. Wow, this is good.
Thank you, Robin, and thank you to the committee for having me here to engage with these amazing champions. Marie, lovely to see you again. I don't know where to start. I had to really swallow deeply the research that you're doing, and to commend this woman to share her story. And as you say, not easy, reliving the abuse. So I'm going to start with a question, because yes, we have findings, right? But who do we hold accountable? There's a two-pronged situation going on. There's the family that are carers, and then you have other service providers. Can you speak to what is it that can be done to hold these service providers accountable? Do you have any examples from your research that said, okay, this is not happening now that we've got this data, and here's what the provinces need to do, here's what your federal government needs to do? And by the way, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but it is totally coincidental that we have two Canadians. And I just want to say this, we hadn't planned this. We were just looking at the people that we wanted to speak on these issues. So I doff my cap to Canada. So Marie, could you just maybe answer what you think what can be done?
Yes, when we did a table with all the doors where the people bang to gain services, I was in shock, actually. There was, I think, 40 or 50 different doors. So I thought this was kind of very strange, where actually we say that we are very good in collaboration and that we are really trying to have no gaps between services and everything. And then we relooked at all the stories, and we found out that there were kind of 3 agencies that were more proactive than the others. So maybe I can talk about those. The first one was the Ombudsman and the Health and Social Services. So actually, when they receive a complaint, they are very proactive. They have a power of inquiry, and they do it. And they also have the power to ask different services to say, hey, continue and give services there. So they can do a fantastic job. The other one is an NGO that is specialized in accompaniment of older adults who are living through elder abuse. In this NGO, what I found that it is doing differently than other type of services is that they have some professionals, but they also have some volunteers. And a lot of time it's older adults who are volunteers who are there to do some type of accompaniment that public services don't have time to do. Like if an older person has some problems with their tenant and they want to go to the tribunal that is responsible for the people who are renting apartments, but actually a volunteer can go with you and do that type of small accompaniment, but actually that is the key to get out of it because the person doesn't feel alone. And the third one is very important because we saw that certain social workers, not all, but certain social workers in the public services that were well-trained actually were very important in all the coordination of services and also some type of accompaniment. So I would say I found 3 champions, but that calls for other types of champions because home services are not only social services, like social workers are important, but we had occupational therapists that we need to work with. And actually there was some abuse coming from them. There was some abuse coming from nurses. So it calls for a better training of a certain number of specialized practitioners that will be able to detect, but also to think themselves about the way they are doing their practice. And I think that some of those actually didn't realize that when they were playing the specialist, they were actually not giving any voice to the person. And it was really felt like psychological abuse.
And if I could just add to this, because the education of the service providers is critical, but how are they educated? And we have to change the paradigm from the medical model of education to the social and human rights model. They need to consider these older people as individuals in their human rights, as opposed to clients who are to receive medical or social services. And when they change their perspective, I think that will make quite a difference to the delivery of services. So that goes without saying for all aspects of the CRPD. It's a matter of not just service providers, but researchers, people even in the disability community, society as a whole changing its perspective to a human rights approach.
I was just, you read my mind because I was going to ask you, Ruth, to jump in. So thank you for doing that. Keeping with this thread, there is a question that has come up because when Marie was talking, she talked about we often focus on the victims and not the perpetrators and the abusers. And I've been in sessions now more and more talking about educating, I mean, as Ruth just mentioned, education, yeah? Educating the abuses. And by the way, also it starts at a very young age. It starts in one's home and, you know, witnessing what's going on and keeping the focus for this program on abuse of women. So going back to girls, etc. Can you share, Ruth, I will start with you, in the disabilities group, how you are tackling this shift of educating the perpetrators and the abusers?
So I think that this is a journey that we need to start on. I wouldn't say we've necessarily tackled this very well, to be frank, but we're still relatively young in terms of the CRPD. But what it is trying to tackle through education, through online training, that we take a human rights approach, and always keeping that in mind, that begins to shift a lot of how training is delivered and how people are perceiving the training. And of course, this needs to go down from the global level to the national and the local level. And we may need to spend a little more time thinking about how do we actually do this effectively. But the CRPD does have some tools within it. When we talk about dealing with awareness raising, dealing with education. And it also has another tool, which is that all countries have to report to the CRPD. And they should be reporting about abuse and violence against people with disabilities. I know this isn't the total category of all older people, but this is a huge number. It's a big percentage. And then civil society has the opportunity as well to comment about what's going on in their country. So this is another tool that can be used. And then the Committee on the Convention will review these reports and then come back to the country and say whatever analysis they come up with. So that's potentially a tool that we would use. But it's a big topic, and which has many layers of how do you tackle this? How do you get at the changing the abuser and supporting the abuse victim?
Marie, did you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, sure. I'm always amazed to see that almost every report or scientific paper will end with kind of two things. We need more research, we need more training. One study said, what do we put in our training, and who are we training, and how are we training them? I think your question is very, very relevant, because there's an importance to raise awareness in the general population. And we see that each time we have public awareness, like ads on TV on elder abuse, there's an increase in the calls at the hotline specialized in elder abuse. So it has a direct effect. That is certainly there. But one of the things that came out of this research, and maybe I went quickly on it, but I would like to come back, is the role of the friends and families that actually were the first one to receive the person. And a lot of time the person will talk to their relatives or friends, and they will not even realize that it is abuse at that time. It's kind of just the first disclosure. So that really led me to think, like, how well are we prepared as a society to, first of all, listen to those things, to be able to recognize and offer support. So there's a need for a general campaign of raising awareness and being able to recognize that these things happen, because again, I hear that elder abuse, no, it cannot happen. Nobody will touch an older person. So no, it does happen. And it can happen to someone close to you. So how well are you prepared? The other thing is, I think we introduced more training in the universities, but we still need to continue to have those modules. But it's ongoing training of different type of practitioners. And a lot of times some practitioners don't get a lot of training. And these are the staff that are less paid and everything, but are going at home to do the cleaning or to do the baiting and all these things. And they see and they hear so many things. So we have also to introduce the dialogue with all the levels of staff. And if these people are more prepared and more aware, they will be doing more detection and actually being able to put in place other services, because they will come back then to the professionals and look at it. So we have kind of a huge program of training and different levels, like general population, different levels of staff, and also college and university, but also ongoing training.
Thank you. Ruth, I want to come back to you to talk a little more about the CRPD. I mean, first of all, congratulations to International Disabilities Alliance and the partners for the, sticking with it, and took 20 years and you got it. So we are struggling. So your insights into how CRPD is relevant to this topic would be sort of most appreciated. If you can give us one article of CRPD that you think we could take away from this to see how we could use that in our advocacy, we would appreciate that.
I think the obvious one article is the Article 16, Freedom from Exploitation, Violence, and Abuse. I mean, that's the title of the article. And within it, they also call for, as I mentioned before, independent monitoring. So there's a tool built in that countries are expected to take action to provide support, provide education, prevention. I think even though that might with reference to people with disabilities, if you have this in place for people with disabilities, it should be in place for everybody, because it makes sense to make it available for everyone once you set up the infrastructure. And probably the statistics of number of people who are older who have some disability is huge, even though the person might not identify themselves as being in the category of a person with a disability.
So I could continue on that topic, but I'm just trying to monitor the chat, because now the questions are like flying in and I want to give them justice to them all. One is now on LGBTQI and aging. Can you speak to the intersectionality of the LGBTQI community, the research, education, training efforts that are underway? Yeah, this comes from an American organization. No, it comes from Outright Action International, and SAGE are working in Asia and Latin America to address this. And I hope I've got the question right. I will, but maybe Marie, you can take this on, please.
Yes, certainly. Well, I'm also working on a project with older LGBTQ, but that was not the purpose of today, but sure, it's very important. Actually, in the Quebec Plan of Action that I just showed earlier, we do recognize that certain groups need specific attention. Not saying that they will be more abused than others, but actually they can be targeted. So this community is part of, people with disability is part of, also the caregivers, because we always tend to see the caregivers as the abusers, but actually a lot of caregivers are abused while doing their role. So we also have a section on that, and so in other groups. So regarding the LGBTQ, what we're doing right now is a program in community housing. Well, actually, there can be a lot of discrimination and bullying towards the LGBTQ community. So there was a huge data collection to see how they do go through a situation of abuse that are more specific to them. And now we're building the program, and we're actually developing what they call a serious game. A serious game is something that you play, but you educate yourself through it. So we're in the technology part now. Our scenarios are done and we're filming the serious games. When you're playing at that game, actually, you can go in one scenario or another depending on what you're answering. So for sure, we have a lot to do. And there's a Canadian team doing a lot of work also in the West. And Gloria Gutman, who is on this call, is actually one of the researchers in that team too. So I think this community is attracting more attention, and that's very good because we all know that if we're not putting any light on it, people tend to go back in the closet, and this is not what we want to do.
Exactly. So I just want to come back to the issue of women, older women with Ruth. What do you think will it take to address the stigma of ageism and sexism with using the CRPD? If you'd like to just give us some of your thoughts on that.
So I think that what we need to do is take an intersectional approach and human rights-based focus and moving away from the medical model. And believe me, when I say that, I support medical interventions and medical assistance, which I personally benefited from, like my hearing aids. So it's not an attack on medical services and medical support, but it's recognizing that the person is an individual and putting their human rights first. So I think I've been saying that a number of times already. We need to also gather evidence. And fantastic Marie's doing this research and talking to the people themselves, that really struck me from what you've said. We need to find out what exactly is the perspective of the people that are affected by this. What are their views, and have more of that research going on throughout the world, and then sharing it and sharing with everyone. We also then potentially need to use the tools of the CRPD insofar as we think they are useful for us. Obviously, the reports to the committees of the Conference of States Parties. The committee of the CRPD also issues special statements that they elaborate on the articles in the convention, because some of the articles are actually very small, or just a few very well-crafted paragraphs, and they then elaborate in many pages on these articles. And as part of that, they do a process of consultation. So it may be that we also want to encourage them to actually elaborate on some of the articles that are relevant to this group.
Very quickly, I know we're coming close to the end of the program, but there are two questions that that Francis has that I just want to raise. One was, and where did it go? It was right up front. It was the types of persons that were interviewed, I believe, in your research, and what sorts of abuse were. You meant the different types of abuse. So what sorts of abuse? And I'm going to add one more to that, which was, were they predominantly women? Were they men? Who were the subjects? And could you give, she says, yeah, can you give some examples of the different types of abuse? And then she goes on to say, often people who are abused are not believed because of their age, level of dementia. What might be some of the signs to look out for? You talk to people, the common person, they're not aware of signs of dementia, so what would you say to that?
I'll start by giving you an brief overview of our samples. So we were looking for different types of disabilities. So we had hearing, cognitive, intellectual disability, mental health problem, agility and mobility. And a lot of time agility and mobility were combined. So, so that was for the general portrait. They were aged between 62 and 90, and their disability occurred at different times in life. That was very interesting. So some persons were born with a disability, but others, they became disabled as adult or as older adult at different times of their life. So we really try to capture diversity in this research. The funding was mainly for psychological and financial mistreatment. However, people, when they started to talk, were talking of a lot of other things. So they were talking about sexual victimization. They were talking about systemic abuse. They were talking about ageism. Some person were even talking about physical abuse. So what we decided in the interviews is when they were starting to talk about something out of the focus, we let them continue actually. So we were paid to document 2 types, but actually we documented more. So that's the first answer. Now, regarding the signs, actually, that's a very good question. I think there's some materials that are published. The signs for physical abuse are not the same than for psychological, are not the same for financial abuse. So there's a series of tips, things that we need to look at. And I know some very good tools were provided. I could maybe try to actually make a little list about tools that I think that are not too bad in those listings that we could share. That would be a good idea.
That would be good. And I just want to make a comment, you know, Grace has put in the chat that she urges panelists and experts to be more inclusive when talking about older women, as older women are also lesbians, bisexual, transgender. I just want to iterate, this is not just about hetero women. We do believe in intersectionality, and so most definitely we are looking at all communities in our advocacy. So Grace, you know, your feedback, your input into our work on older women is welcome. We're always looking for people to contribute. Please go to our NGO Committee on Aging. Join us if you're not a member. If you are, join our subcommittee on older women and help us with your expertise. So we are now at 2:53. Sorry, Robin, I'm 2 minutes over. But I just want to thank both Ruth and Marie for a really insightful and substantive conversation. Now, Robin, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. This was really, really informative. And so in maybe 2 minutes each, Ruth and Marie, any takeaways that you would like to give our attendees, all of us?
I would just take away that the CRPD has some useful references that can be helpful for the advocacy work of certainly older people with disabilities who, whatever their intersectionality is or their sexual orientation. And I do think that the other takeaway is that we need to maybe build some bridges and alliances between the different organizations of people with disabilities and the older adult organizations and the LGBTQ and other organizations to make sure that we really are being intersectional in our approach. I think that we've been talking about intersectionality, but actually making sure that we practice what we preach is also important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, one of the things that we've heard so far is that intersectionality. There is that cross-cutting, certainly, of the experience of ageism and sexism, kind of regardless of who we are speaking of, you know, so there are the similarities. Yes, I agree. Marie?
Yeah, intersectionality. And one of the things we didn't really talk a lot today, but it's the life course perspective. I think the life course perspective really helps us to understand what went on before and how it does influence what you become as an older woman. My other point, and I think you heard it before, but I really want to insist, is giving the voices to the people. Like those research are more difficult to do. I actually could spend half an hour telling you all the techniques we use to do the recruitment. It was difficult. But once we're there and we're having a conversation with someone, it's so rich. And you really got the understanding from their own mouth, their own perspective, their own history. And that for me is really a key, an important key to move forward.
Right, and as much as, and you were spot on when you said earlier that so many reports end up with more research and education is needed, but it is fact, just as you were saying, the research is needed when we're talking about all these, the populations that are so integral to this. You do need to have those one-on-one interviews, you know, to be able to get the information, to be able to feed the policy, to be able to make people's, at least begin to try and make people's lives better. So there's no question that the research is necessary for the data to feed the policy. And I think just sort of to wrap this up, I very much appreciated when you were describing the model in Canada, Marie, between government that has the ability to say, you must, you know, we're going to interview you because you appear to be someone in distress. You have the NGOs that have the volunteers that can accompany people, as well as then the NGOs that have the social work coordinators that can help coordinate all those services. As a former assistant commissioner, I can tell you that here in New York City, and it seems to be unique to bigger cities, where you have those kinds of resources available. That sort of model does exist here in New York City, and it has been effective. It doesn't get everybody, and it doesn't fix everything, you know, but it is one of the tools in the toolkit. So it is very helpful. But I guess, you know, my goodness, there's so many takeaways and so many thoughts, you know, just to leave everyone with, when you are talking about certainly the education, public education campaigns, within that, just as you're saying, Ruth, within that human rights perspective, within that human rights lens, I'm wondering, why do we have to have elder abuse awareness only one day a year? It should be throughout the year. And here we talk about the public education campaigns, right? Then thinking about even the education of providers, you know, social service, medical providers in the educational system. I can tell you, when you were saying that, I was thinking of many situations that came to my attention were people being discharged from hospitals with the presumption that the family wanted to take care of this older person, had the capacity and the capability to care for this older person. Boom, there you go. That's not the kind of supports that these family caregivers need. And so the other piece of it is educating in my mind also, to support what you're saying, the medical providers about family needs. And so that also talks about supports for the caregivers in the communities. You know, it is a full package of support that we need. Talking about education, I know that there's also education of bank tellers around recognizing signs of financial abuse when it's you know, in a public institution like that. But for all of us here, it is about becoming the advocates, right where we find ourselves, with our civil society, with our organizations, with our government. We need to be involved. And so it is all of our responsibility to have that voice, to be the voice for the voiceless, and help them to have their own voice. And so I guess on that note, we can close. I thank you, Marie, thank you so much for everything you've brought. Ruth, everything that you have brought, and all the participants. Erica, thank you. Excellent job with the moderating. Francis for kicking us off, and the ambassador, I assume that he has gone now, but and everybody who came and stayed, I very much appreciate you coming for this very important and, to me, interesting and engaging conversation. So everybody have a great day and enjoy the summer, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Goodbye.
So long.